And so, hey, Paul, do you like fish sticks, Paul?
Sure.
What are you, Paul, a gay fish?
South Park once again attacked Kanye West's public image and did so in such a way that the joke became something more than just an episode of a television show. In one episode, the creators used an extremely simple technique, a play on words with the phrase fish sticks, which sounds very similar to fish dicks. At first glance, it seems like a childish pun designed to elicit primitive laughter, but it is precisely this primitiveness that made it so devastating. In the episode, the characters discuss the idea of the joke, pass it around to each other, and as a result, it becomes not just funny, but contagious. Laughter spreads across the stage, and everyone who hears the conversation immediately joins in the mockery. The key detail is how the person at whom the joke was aimed reacted to it. Instead of responding to what was happening with ironic self-deprecation, he took everything literally and painfully. For the viewer, it looked even funnier, because what was intended as lighthearted mockery turned into a mirror reflecting vulnerability and excessive seriousness. Parker and Stone played on this. They did not so much mock the word as emphasize the character traits that are vulnerable to this kind of ridicule: arrogance, confidence in one's own exceptionality, and a tendency to dramatize. It was no coincidence that the creators of South Park chose this particular target. Kanye's image in the media had long been associated with flamboyant, sometimes provocative actions and statements. His public behavior, outrageousness, and confidence provided plenty of material for satire. The joke with the fish sticks turned into a concise metaphor. One seemingly childish phrase is enough to show how easily a celebrity's fragile self-esteem can become the object of public amusement. This circumstance alone made the episode not just funny, but, in a sense, socially significant. The public reaction was immediate. The joke went viral. Memes, remixes, and remakes began circulating across platforms, and the musical interlude from the episode gained a second life in the form of audio samples for videos and parodies. What was initially a local event in a television series became global. People made collages, transferred the joke to other cultural contexts, and the longer it spread, the more it seemed that the meme had broken away from the original episode and taken on a life of its own. Despite public statements about his calm attitude towards the joke, in private conversations and according to insiders, his reaction was different. He was outraged and felt that he was being mocked. As proof that this was allegedly mockery related to his sexual orientation, he cited minor details such as clothing and mannerisms, things that many people would not consider significant indicators, but which became arguments for him. The irony of the situation was that it was precisely this painful reaction that confirmed the satirist's intention. When a person is unable to respond with self-irony, ridicule gains additional power and longevity. This episode became more than just a funny moment. It formed a lasting cultural symbol. Over the years, people recalled the gay fish whenever they discussed episodes involving Kanye. The image became firmly embedded in the digital memory of the internet and became a refrain in conversations about his behavior. Even individual scandals, such as the incident at MTV when he interrupted Taylor Swift, became part of the same picture. The image of a creative genius began to merge with the identification of him as a conflictual and prone to public antics. Over time, South Park returned to the topic in later episodes, but with a different tone. While the joke was initially playful, the authors later took a darker tone and used metaphors and allegories to discuss not only the artist's personality, but also broader social phenomena, the influence of celebrities on public opinion, the possible confusion of mental health issues and aggressive rhetoric, and how words affect those around us. In one episode, Cupid's image is transformed into a symbol that shoots arrows, spreading toxic ideas throughout the school. This is no longer a simple parody, but a warning about the consequences when charisma is combined with dangerous rhetoric. It is interesting to observe how memes take on a life of their own. They move from content to social behavior codes. Reactions, parodies, and remixes appear, and all of this becomes part of the conversation. People who have not seen the original episode recognize the joke from references on the internet, and then the meaning no longer depends on the context, but takes on a life of its own. This is dangerous for celebrities because their image is created not only by television programs, but but also by the collective creativity of users. If society has decided to fix a label, then an article or interview with a refutation is not enough. The effect continues in the form of jokes, pictures, and music remixes. Another important point is how a satirical image affects professional reputation. For an artist whose success was built on talent and bold decisions, being turned into a caricature can destroy public trust. In the eyes of some listeners and viewers, instead of a creative figure, there appears an image of a person with inflated self-esteem whose emotional reactions often go beyond the norm. And here the question is not only whether it was right to joke, but how deeply the satirical image penetrates perception, changing the assessment of achievements and leaving behind a complex artistic palette of creativity. Finally, we must not forget the mechanisms of satire themselves. Excellent sarcasm is not just biting, but a tool that exposes weaknesses. That is why the creators of South Park are so careful but purposeful in their attacks. They choose a topic, formulate an idea, and give it a simple, memorable form. When this form enters the public consciousness, the joke begins to work on a person's reputation for longer than one shameful scene in a show. All of this is part of a cultural dialogue about power, fame, and the responsibility of public figures. The gay fish meme has not only become firmly established on the internet, it has become an indicator of how collective culture processes information and transforms it into symbols. Social media platforms act as amplifiers. A short segment of an episode, repeated a million times, becomes an artifact in its own right. People remixed the song, made parody clips and staged scenes in hundreds of short videos, turning a local joke into a global refrain. The social dynamics here are simple. When a mass of people start referring to the same joke, the meaning ceases to depend on the original source. Those who have not seen the original recognize the reference by its consequences, by a fragment of the song, by an image, or by a line taken out of context. This means that the episode is no longer controlled by the show's creators. The meaning is formed jointly with the audience. As a result, the celebrity targeted by the satire is deprived of the opportunity to dictate the framework for interpreting their own image. The interpretation begins to take on a life of its own and can change beyond recognition. Another important factor is the media logic of news. The emergence of memes serves as a trigger for reports, columns, and analytical materials. Journalists and bloggers discuss not so much the pun itself as the phenomenon of reaction, why society is so eager to replicate one idea, and what this says about culture as a whole. This turns the anecdote into a serious conversation about fame, responsibility, and public persona. Constant mention in the media keeps the meme alive. The more people talk about it, the harder it is to get rid of the label. Even excuses and explanations given in interviews sometimes fuel new retellings and parodies. It is also important to note how the perception of creativity changes. When an artist becomes a meme, the audience involuntarily begins to view their work through the prism of the label that has been attached to them. Songs, albums, and stage images are evaluated in the context of reactions and public image. For some listeners, this creates a mixed impression. On the one hand, there is respect for talent, and on the other, there is a tendency to confuse the artistic with the everyday. New releases are often met with criticism based not on musical value, but on the story surrounding the authority, and this changes the trajectory of a career. In addition, such stories show how vulnerable public reputation is. Celebrities become symbols that internet users use to express their emotions and ideas. Memes and jokes become markers of identity. Participants in internet culture unite in groups, sharing laughter and irony about public figures. These markers are often stronger than any official explanations. Collective sarcasm shapes the values and lexicon of the community. It is also worth remembering the commercial aspect. Virality sometimes works in the artist's favor. Unexpected interest can attract new listeners and viewers. But the effect is twofold. Memes attract attention, but often leave a negative connotation that scares off partners and brands. Advertisers and event organizers closely monitor the artist's image. If they are associated with something controversial, commercial contracts may be at risk. Then virality turns from a bonus into a risk to income and collaborations. This raises the ethical dilemma of the limits of satire. In a democratic society, Satirical works perform an important function. They criticize abuses, expose absurdities, and prevent those in power from escaping scrutiny. But when satire ceases to be targeted parody and turns into prolonged personal harassment, the question arises, where is the line between criticism and harassment? The answer depends on the context, on the intentions of the authors, the cultural background, and how the subject of the satire reacts. Sometimes it is the reaction of a celebrity that intensifies the mockery and makes it long-lasting. Finally, we must not forget the role of the audience. In an era of content overproduction, every user has a choice: to pick up a meme and repost it, or to stop and think about what exactly is behind the joke. The level of critical thinking in society largely determines how long the label will live and what consequences it will have for a particular person. Public figures, in turn, may try to reboot their image through self-irony, style changes, charitable and social initiatives. But such steps require time, strategy, and honesty. The consequences of such large-scale satire are not limited to eternal memes and laughter in the comments. They become embedded in the fabric of public perception and change the trajectory of a person's career, sometimes gently, sometimes catastrophically. Once an image is established, it acts as a filter. Any new work, interview, or concert is analyzed through the prism of the existing label. This increases the pressure on the artist, not only because they have to prove their talent, but also because every action is interpreted as confirmation or refutation of the imposed narrative. In such a field, even a technically strong release can receive a cold reception, not because of its quality, but because of the audience's fatigue with the narrative associated with the author. However, not all stories end forever. In public life, there are mechanisms for gradually changing one's image. The first step is acceptance, acknowledging mistakes, talking honestly about one's reaction, and trying to explain it. When a celebrity demonstrates a capacity for self-irony, it instantly reduces the level of aggression. Self-irony works as a neutralizer. It shows that a person sees their vulnerability and can joke about it, a quality that society usually values. It is important that self-irony is sincere. A pharisaical or rehearsed smile only exacerbates the feeling of artificiality and can increase public skepticism. The second tool is strategic communication and long-term work on one's image. PR campaigns, rare but thoughtful interviews, and participation in projects of high social significance help to refocus attention. When an artist supports charitable initiatives or participates in educational or cultural projects, it creates a new layer of perception, that of a person who uses their influence not only for their own benefit. Such gestures do not erase the past, but they help to broaden the context of the discussion. Now the conversation includes professional achievements and personal efforts, not just banter. The third path is creativity as a means of restoration. New albums, roles, or collaborations can change the narrative if they are truly powerful and demonstrate growth. Art has the ability to speak to the public in a different language, the language of emotions, skill, and honesty. If music or public performances resonate, they create a lasting counterexample to the caricature. But this path is demanding. Creative successes must be clear and consistent to drown out the noise of the viral image. The fourth aspect is personal work on oneself. Sometimes there are real psychological problems behind public incidents, problems that have been underestimated or ignored. Therapy, calm work with emotions, and public discussion of one's own path to a better state help not only the individual, but also the public consciousness. They remove the drama and shift the conversation to the plane of human growth. Openness about inner struggles and active work on them are often perceived by the public with sympathy, as long as they do not look like an attempt at manipulation. The fifth point is time and patience. An image that has become entrenched in memes rarely disappears quickly, but over time, public interest shifts, new topics and new scandals emerge, and old tricks fade into the background. During this period, it is important not to make any sudden moves or try to forcibly whitewash your reputation. It is much more effective to focus on work, quality content, and honest actions that gradually shift the focus. Finally, it is worth remembering the collective aspect. Society participates in the creation and maintenance of caricatures. Therefore, changing an image is a joint process. Sometimes it is useful to collaborate with those who created the parody. Openly working with humorous formats, Participating in joint projects or meeting with critics demonstrates a willingness to engage in dialogue. Such a step is risky, but also promising. It signals that a person is not running away from criticism, but is ready to interact. To sum up, memes and jokes are enough to damage someone's image, but not always enough to destroy their career forever. It all depends on a number of factors: the sincerity of the reaction, the quality of further steps, the ability to laugh at oneself, and time. For some celebrities, satirical episodes remain just an unpleasant milestone, followed by a new chapter. For others, they are a label that keeps coming back. In any case, the story with the fish sticks is more than just a funny pun. It is an example of how modern media culture constructs symbols and how difficult it is for a person to break free from the image imposed on them.